Get out of my house right now!
But I pay for this place.
I don't care. Just pack up and go.
My father gave me 10 minutes to leave the luxury condo I had spent years paying for. He stood in the doorway with his arms folded while my stepmother watched from behind him, and my younger brother was already talking about where he wanted to put his furniture. 10 minutes, Marin, Dad said. Take what belongs to you and go. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. I had made every monthly payment connected to that condo. I had covered the fees when Dad said money was tight. I had even paid for the renovations he proudly showed relatives as if he had financed everything himself. Now he was throwing me out. My stepmother gave me a sympathetic smile that somehow felt worse than my father's anger. Your father thinks everyone needs a fresh start, she said. I looked at my brother. Including you? He shrugged. It's Dad's place. That sentence hurt more than anything else. I didn't argue. I walked into the bedroom, pulled my suitcase from the closet, and started packing. Dad followed me. You're making this harder than it needs to be. No, I said quietly. I'm making it faster. He didn't understand what I meant. Neither did I, not yet. I carried my suitcase downstairs, placed it in my car, and drove away without saying goodbye. 3 blocks from the condo, I pulled into a parking lot and opened my laptop. I had received an email that morning about the financing arrangement. At the time, I hadn't paid much attention. Now I opened the attached documents. I read the first page, then the second, then I stopped. My father's name wasn't where I expected it to be. Mine was. I called Nora, the woman who had helped me arrange the financing years earlier. When she answered, I said, Nora, Dad just threw me out. She was silent for a moment. Then she asked, did he ever actually read the agreement? I looked at the document again. No. Nora exhaled. Then you need to read it very carefully before you do anything else. I turned to the termination clause, and for the first time since leaving that condo, I stopped feeling helpless. I kept staring at the termination clause while Nora stayed on the phone. Read it slowly, she said. Don't assume you understand it just because you signed it. I followed every line with my finger. The arrangement was more complicated than Dad had ever admitted. I wasn't simply making payments for him. My name was attached to the financing and occupancy agreement, while Dad had been authorized to live in the condo under specific conditions. Wait, I whispered. What? He couldn't just throw me out? Not according to what you're reading. I leaned back in the driver's seat. For years, Dad had spoken about the condo as though it belonged entirely to him. Whenever I questioned the payments, he told me I was helping the family. Whenever I mentioned refinancing, he promised he would handle it soon. Soon had lasted almost 4 years. I asked Nora to send me copies of every document she still had. Then my phone started ringing. Dad. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. Then again. Finally, I listened. Marin, this is ridiculous. You need to come home. We're not going to discuss this over the phone. I almost laughed at the word home. The same man who had given me 10 minutes to leave was now asking me to come home. I called Elliot, the property manager. He recognized my name immediately. I need clarification about the agreement, I said. He became careful with his words. I can explain the process, but you'll need to follow the contract. That's what I intend to do. I asked him to send everything in writing. After the call, another message appeared from Dad. You're going to regret turning your back on your family. I read it twice. Then I opened the termination paperwork again. This time I didn't look at it as a daughter. I looked at it as the person whose name was actually on the agreement. I met Nora at a quiet diner near her office, carrying a folder thick enough to make my hands ache. She spread the documents across the table. Start from the beginning, she said. I told her everything. Dad's foreclosure story. The condo. The payments. The promises to refinance. The extra money he kept requesting whenever something supposedly went wrong. Nora listened without interrupting. Then she tapped one of the statements. Marin, this doesn't match what he told you. I looked closer. What do you mean? The amounts he claimed he needed aren't matching the expenses connected to the condo. My stomach tightened. We went through the records line by line. There were payments I remembered making, But there were others Dad had described as emergency expenses that weren't connected to the property at all. I called him. He answered immediately. Finally. Are you coming back? No. I have some questions. His voice changed. What kind of questions? Why did you need the money last October? For the condo. That payment wasn't made to the condo. Silence. Then he laughed. You're digging through old paperwork because you're angry. Why didn't you refinance? I told you. The bank wouldn't approve it. Then why did you never show me the paperwork? His voice hardened. Because I don't need to explain every financial decision to my daughter. I stared at Nora. That answer told me more than any document had. Then Colleen came onto the call. Marin, you're keeping score inside your own family. I swallowed. I've been paying the bills. I think I deserve to know what I'm paying for. Travis suddenly spoke in the background. She's acting like she's the landlord. The room went quiet. I looked down at the agreement. 4 years, they treated me like the person responsible for the condo. But the moment I asked for authority, they acted offended. I closed the folder. Maybe that's the problem, I said. Dad demanded to know what I meant. I answered calmly. You wanted me responsible without giving me any control. Then I ended the call. I drove home with the folder sitting on the passenger seat, but I didn't open it until I was inside. For years, I had avoided looking too closely at Dad's finances because every time I asked questions, he made me feel selfish. That night, I stopped protecting him. I spread the statements across my kitchen table and started matching every payment to the reason he'd given me. The pattern appeared slowly. Money I thought had gone toward repairs had covered unrelated expenses. Payments supposedly meant for the condo had disappeared into other accounts. Then I found something worse. A recent purchase order listed new furniture. Not for Dad. For Travis. I stared at the document. The delivery address was the condo. My hands went cold. I called Colleen. She answered after several rings. Did you know Travis was moving into the condo? Silence. Then she said, Marin, don't make this into something it isn't. So he is. He's family. I know. You're acting like he doesn't deserve a place to live. I paid for that place. Colleen sighed. Your father said you understood the arrangement. What arrangement? Another pause. He said you would continue handling the payments even after you moved out. I felt something inside me go completely still. So Dad planned this before he threw me out. Colleen didn't answer. She didn't need to. I hung up and called Nora. When I told her what I'd learned, she was quiet. Then don't react emotionally, she said. Follow the agreement exactly. I will. I opened the termination paperwork again. This time I read every condition. Notice periods. Payment responsibilities. Occupancy requirements. I highlighted each section and made a checklist. Dad had spent years assuming I would solve every problem he created. He had no idea I was about to stop solving them. My phone rang. Dad. I answered. You've talked to Colleen. Yes. You're making a serious mistake. I looked at the paperwork. No, Dad. I'm finally reading what I signed. He went silent. Then he said, You wouldn't do this to your family. I replied, You already did. And I began filling out the first termination form. I read the termination form 3 times before signing it. There was no dramatic feeling of victory. My hands were steady. I attached the documents, checked the dates, and submitted everything through the proper channel. Then I waited. Less than an hour later, I received confirmation that the notice had been received. I stared at the screen. It was real. I wasn't threatening Dad. I wasn't bluffing. I was simply following the agreement he had ignored. My phone rang. Dad. I answered. What did you do? His voice was sharp enough to make me pull the phone away from my ear. I submitted the termination notice. You can't do that. I just did. You're going to destroy everything. I looked at the confirmation email. No. I'm ending my responsibility for something you told me wasn't mine. You're my daughter. And you threw me out. That was a family argument. You gave me 10 minutes. He went quiet. Then his voice softened. Marin, come home. We'll work this out. I almost believed him. That was the dangerous part. Then I remembered Travis talking about moving his furniture into the condo. I remembered Colleen telling me I would keep paying. I remembered Dad calling it his home. No, I said. What? I'm not reversing this. He began threatening legal action. I told him calmly that he could speak with the appropriate professionals if he believed I had violated the agreement. That made him angrier. You think some piece of paper makes you untouchable? No. I paused. I think the piece of paper is the only reason you were able to live there in the first place. He hung up. A few minutes later, Travis called. His voice was different. Are you serious about the condo? Yes. But where am I supposed to live? I closed my eyes. You knew I was paying for it. I didn't know Dad was going to make you stop. He didn't make me stop. I looked at the confirmation email again. I chose to. Dad called the next afternoon, and this time he didn't sound angry. He sounded worried. Marin, we need to talk. We've talked. No. You haven't listened. I almost smiled. I listened when you gave me 10 minutes to leave. He ignored that. The condo situation can be fixed. How? You reverse the termination. And then, I'll take care of everything. I looked at the stack of documents beside me. You've said that before. This time is different. Why? He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, because Travis can't afford another place. I closed my eyes. There it was. Not an apology. Not regret. Problem. He wanted me to solve it. You threw me out so Travis could move in, I said. That's not what happened. Then what happened? He needed help. So did I. Silence. I waited. Nothing came. Dad finally said, you're being selfish. I laughed softly. I'm selfish because I don't want to keep paying for a place I'm not allowed to live in. Your family. I know. Then act like it. I looked at the termination documents. I am. He became quiet. Then he said, what exactly do you want? Nothing. That isn't true. It is. You want me to suffer. No, Dad. I took a breath. I want you to handle your own expenses. He hung up. Later, Elliot called to update me. Your father came by, he said. Is everything okay? He had questions about the termination. What did you tell him? That the process has to follow the agreement. I thanked him. Then Elliot added, he seemed surprised. I looked toward the window. For years, Dad had acted like the condo was something I owed him. Now the monthly costs were sitting in front of him without my name behind them. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. But when Dad called again 10 minutes later, I didn't answer. For once, his emergency wasn't mine. The next call came from Colleen. Her voice was unusually calm. Marin, can we talk without fighting? I've been trying to do that from the beginning. She hesitated. Your father is under a lot of pressure. So was I. I know. That surprised me. I sat down. What changed? She sighed. The condo costs more than I realized. I almost said, yes. Instead I waited. She continued. Your father thought the payments would continue. I know. And Travis can't afford to take them over. I know. Silence filled the call. Then Colleen said, did you really pay all that money? Almost all of it. She was quiet for several seconds. I thought Graham was paying you back. He wasn't. Another silence. I'm sorry, she finally said. I didn't know what to say. It was the first apology I'd heard from anyone in the family. Then she added, but you could still help us. The apology disappeared immediately. I looked at the documents on my table. That's exactly what got us here. She became defensive. You're punishing us because you're angry. No. I'm refusing to keep funding something I was thrown out of. She said nothing. I thought the conversation was over. Then she whispered, your father told me you were doing this because you wanted the condo for yourself. I stared at the wall. I don't want the condo. Then why are you doing this? Because I don't want the responsibility anymore. After we hung up, I opened the financial statements again. One payment caught my attention. It was the same amount Dad had once described as an emergency expense. I checked the destination. It wasn't the condo. It wasn't a repair. It wasn't even a household bill. It had gone toward a personal debt Dad had never mentioned. I saved the statement. Then another one. And another. The pattern was too large to ignore. This wasn't one mistake. Dad had built his entire lifestyle around my willingness to rescue him. And now that I had stopped, everyone could finally see how much of it had been mine to carry. The family meeting happened in Dad's living room, with everyone sitting farther apart than usual. Graham looked exhausted. Colleen kept her arms folded. Travis stared at the floor. I placed my folder on the coffee table. Dad looked at it. What is that? Everything. He frowned. I don't need a lecture. Good, I said. Because I'm not giving one. I opened the folder. These are the payments I've made for the condo. Graham shifted in his chair. These are the expenses you told me they covered. I placed another document beside them. And these are the actual transactions. Colleen picked up the papers. Her expression changed. Graham. He didn't answer. Travis looked over her shoulder. I continued. I paid because you told me you were struggling. I stayed quiet because you were my father. But I was never told the truth. Graham rubbed his forehead. I was going to pay you back. When? When things improved. They didn't improve because you kept spending money you didn't have. He slammed his hand against the armrest. You think I wanted this? No. I looked directly at him. I think you wanted me to keep fixing it. Nobody spoke. Then Travis quietly said, Dad told me Marin would keep paying. Colleen turned toward him. You knew. Travis swallowed. I knew she paid for the condo. The room became painfully quiet. Graham looked at me. What do you want? I shook my head. Nothing. That isn't possible. It is. I closed the folder. I don't want your condo. I don't want your money. I don't want an apology you give me because you're afraid of the consequences. His face tightened. Marin. The worst part wasn't being thrown out. I stood. It was realizing you stopped seeing me as your daughter a long time ago. I picked up the folder. You saw me as the person who would always pay. Graham looked down. For once he had nothing to say. I walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard Colleen ask him quietly, Why didn't you tell us the truth? I was halfway to my car when Dad called again. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. Marin. His voice sounded different. What? Can you come back? I looked at the building behind me. No. I need to talk to you. We already talked. Not like this. I stayed beside my car. What changed? He took a long breath. The termination is final. I know. I didn't think you'd actually go through with it. I told you I would. I thought you'd calm down. I closed my eyes. That was the problem. He had never believed my decisions mattered until they affected him. What do you need? I need help. There it was. I almost laughed. With what? The condo. Dad, that's not my responsibility anymore. I know. He sounded tired. I just need some time. Time for what? To figure things out. You've had years. Silence. Then he said, Travis can't afford the payments. Then Travis can't afford the condo. He's your brother. So. Dad didn't answer. I could hear traffic behind him. Finally he said, I thought family meant you wouldn't let us fall. I stared at the keys in my hand. Family means you don't throw someone out and expect them to keep paying the bills. He was silent. Then he asked, Do you hate me? The question caught me off guard. No. Then why won't you help? Because loving you doesn't mean I have to keep rescuing you. He didn't respond. I added, If you want a relationship with me, it can't be based on what I can pay. He breathed heavily. I don't know how to fix this. I can't fix it for you. Another silence. Then he quietly said, I understand. I didn't know if he really did. But for the first time, I didn't feel responsible for making sure he did. I ended the call and got into my car. The condo was no longer mine to carry. Neither was my father's life. I carried the last box into my apartment and set it on the floor beside the kitchen counter. It wasn't a luxury condo. There was no marble lobby, private elevator, or view over the city. It was smaller, quieter, and completely mine. I placed my keys on the counter and stood there for a moment. My phone rang. Dad. I answered. Hello. Neither of us spoke immediately. Then he said, The condo is over. I leaned against the counter. I know. I had to make other arrangements. Okay. He sighed. I wanted to tell you something. What? I was wrong. I closed my eyes. It wasn't the apology I'd imagined. There was no dramatic speech. No excuse. Just those 3 words. I treated you like you owed me, he continued. I thought because you were my daughter you'd always help. You did. I know. His voice cracked slightly. I don't know when I started thinking that way. I looked around my apartment. Probably when helping became normal. He was quiet. Then he asked, "Can we still be family?" I swallowed. Maybe. Maybe. It has to be different. How? No more money between us. He didn't argue. All right. And no guilt. Another pause. All right. I believed neither of us knew whether we could actually do it. But at least the terms were finally honest. After we hung up, I opened my email. The final confirmation was waiting. The termination had been completed. I stared at the message, then closed the laptop. For years, I had believed losing that condo would mean losing everything I'd sacrificed for. I finally understood the opposite. The condo wasn't what I had lost. It was what I had finally stopped caring. My father had given me 10 minutes to leave his home. He thought he was taking something away from me. Instead, those 10 minutes forced me to walk away from the one thing that had controlled my life for years. The belief that being a good daughter meant endlessly paying for someone else's choices. Picked up my keys. This time, every bill waiting for me belonged to me. And that felt better than owning a luxury condo ever had.